Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, TrendsResearch.com's Gerald Celente says while the U.S. is obsessed with its expensive military, China is all about business. Author of The Money Bubble, John Rubino believes many currencies are about to be drastically devalued and has coping strategies to deal with that. We'll talk to Gerald Celente right after this.
Randy Elvis Frisky and his Las Vegas show band relive the movie music memories from Blue Hawaii to Viva Las Vegas, in Ladner, Chilliwack, Maple Ridge, Nanaimo, Victoria, Sydney, Courtenay, Campbell River, Surrey, Kelowna. Details at RandyElvisFrisky.com. Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Sitting in for Phil Mackesy, here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Gerald Celente of TrendsResearch.com, also the publisher of TrendsJournal. Gerald, if I was going to read a headline in the TrendsJournal today, what would it be?
Equity markets start off year on down note.
And with the equity markets down, is this the feared start of the slide down, the correction?
It is. It's a couple of things happen. Tracking trends is an understanding of where we are, how we got here, and where we're going. And you go back to this past June in 2013, and the Fed announced that they were going to, quote, taper. And they make up these words. Sequestering was another one. There's no such word, but they made that one up. And,
I wondered where the jury was.
Yeah. So they're going to cut back on their buying, how many million? $85 billion worth of U.S. bonds and mortgage-backed securities each month. And, of course, that was the only reason why that we have any rebound in our economy, particularly the equity markets, because that's where all that money flowed, plus the record low interest rates. So now, at the end of the year, the Fed announced, just like during Christmas time when there's not a lot of hustle and bustle going on, that they were going to start paring back this month, January. And now we see the results. First of all, what happened, you see, back in June when they hinted that they were going to do it, they flooded the news media with their shills and lackeys saying that, well, we really don't mean it, we may not do it, we may possibly do it, if we do it, we're not going to do it a lot. So markets calmed down a lot after going into a bit of a shock. And then when they announced that this time, as I said, it was the Christmas holiday, not a lot happening, markets spiked up, went back down, boop. And now reality's setting in. The only reason why there is any recovery, as I said, is because of all the stimulus and record low interest rates. Now with the tapering taking off, we're seeing the global markets retract. And especially the emerging markets, we're down already over 3% just in the first few days of this year. And you're looking at equity markets around the globe. And you're also looking at interest rates going up, particularly in the 10-year bond, the yield going up over 3% in the U.S. So what all this means is that whether it's China, whether it's the UK or European Union, they cannot sustain this. As a matter of fact, the news just out this week is that the EU is going to keep their interest rates at their record lows. You cannot have this growth of any magnitude without a lot of cheap money flowing into the system. It's showing up. So we believe they're going to try another round of tapering after the end of January when they have their Fed meeting, and it's going to cause some real serious problems, and they're going to come up with a new name for for stimulus. They won't call it quantitative easing. We have a new Fed chair now in, Janet Yellen. Maybe she'll make up a new name.
Wow, so we're playing the name game, but the blame remains the same.
Yes, again, I'm not saying this, as, just making, comments off the cuff about what's going on over here. These are facts, and you could, anybody could read them, and that is, when you even listen to people like this guy Andrew Husser, who was the Fed official, and this isn't from the World Socialist website. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Here's his quote. I can only say I'm sorry, America. As a former Fed official, I was responsible for executing the centerpiece program of the Fed's first plunge into the bond buying experiment known as quantitative easing. The central bank continues to spin QE as a tool for helping Main Street, But I've come to recognize the program for what it really is. The greatest backdoor Wall Street bailout of all time. That's a quote from 11 November 2013. So that's where all the dough's gone. That's why the world equity. And again, don't listen to me. Look what's going on over there in Japan with Abenomics. Another scam. They're dumping trillions of yen into the system. You look at the data, there's still a terrible economic situation. But hey, that Nikkei was doing great up until a few days ago.
Does central banking provide this kind of volatility? And is there an opportunity now for people to profit from all these mistakes?
Well, I don't give financial advice. I believe that you're going to see another round of stimulus worldwide, even in China. They're backpedaling already. You know, they have a cash squeeze going on. They say they're not going to help the shadow banking. Shadow banking now is accounting for about 50% of all the new loans. And I love it. That's another white shoe boy name for loan sharks. These guys are charging like up to 40% interest rates. And so now they're pulling back, and they're not going to be as stringent as they said they were. So my belief is that with the next round of stimulus by whatever other name, you're then going to see another spike in gold and silver prices. That's my best forecast that I can give, considering the information that's available, because you never know what's going on behind the scenes.
China, of course, is the very secret bamboo curtain country that it always was. They just appear to be open right now, don't they?
Yes, but they're still in better shape than the U.S. As a matter of fact, one of the trends for 2014 that we have in the TrendsJournal, is going to be out in just a few weeks. We put out the preliminary already, is Chinatown. And we go on to show how, in 1960, when President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the U.S., warned us, the world and the Americans, that the military-industrial complex was taking over the country, we had a GDP of $520 billion. China's was $61 billion. Now we fast forward to 2012, as last year's the numbers have been tabulated. And the U.S. still tops the list at $15.6 trillion, but guess what? China's number 2 at $8.52 trillion. So you can see how times have changed. And so what we're looking at is the United States. We have $17 trillion plus in national debt. China, of course, has debt too, but the big difference is they're sitting on almost $4 trillion worth of foreign exchange reserves. And I have to tell the Canadians what's going on over there. You got a lot of Chinese people coming over and buying property. Their yuan is increasing against the dollar and the Canadian dollar, and they're buying up assets really cheaply compared to what's costing them over in their own country. Plus, a lot of people want to leave there. They have 1.3 billion people, pollution problems, congestion problems, and pending government problems.
And of course, if you want to have more than one child, one of the rules for doing that is you have to purchase over $300,000 worth of foreign real estate.
So there you go.
Well, if you want to have kids, you have to go buy property somewhere.
Yeah, and what they're doing is they're buying up everywhere, whether it's Japan, Australia, Canada, U.S., Singapore. Singapore's Chinese. Yeah, so is Malaysia's turning that way too. I mean, that's Singapore. And matter of fact, Myanmar, that's going to be one of the big hot ones. But there's going to be a lot of tension in the meantime. But again, Vietnam as well. I was in Vietnam when it first opened up in 94, 95. And you can see it was already Chinese, although they call it Vietnam, The Chinese are the business people. And you can see the deals being bought up, whether it's here in New York with the $5 billion Atlantic Yard apartment project, which is the biggest project in New York probably over the last 2 decades, to buying up the J.P. Morgan Chase Plaza in the heart of Wall Street, to having a big ownership in the GM building, on and on. And so there's buying up farmland in Ukraine. It's nonstop. So when you look at what's going on, all this is, the bottom line is cheap dough. And if they tighten up on the money, you're going to start seeing a real economic shockwave hit, and we believe the shockwave will hit between now and the end of the second quarter of 2014.
More with Gerald Celente next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Gerald Celente of TrendsResearch.com, publisher of TrendsJournal. If China is snapping up all the available land around the planet, also all the physical gold on Earth that was produced last year, what is their long-term plan, do you believe?
Business. You know, it's business. The North Americans, NATO, the Westerns, they got war on their mind all the time. Mideast. It's business. And as I mentioned to you, we're writing this piece, and as I'm writing the piece, all of a sudden it hit me. I remember as a kid hearing, with Mao Zedong, hearing about the paper tiger, that America was a paper tiger. And I looked it up, and sure enough, he used it to describe American imperialism. Hey, you want to start a war in Afghanistan? I got a better one. Let's go to Iraq. Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda. I'll tell you, even though I'll lie. And then with those other wonderful wars, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, oh, and Obama, the Nobel Peace Prize winner. You remember his winning war, the Libyan War. We won't call it a war. We'll use the official propaganda name for it. A time-limited, scope-limited kinetic action. Yeah, so when you look at the United States squandering its resources, it's exactly what Mao Zedong said in 1956. When he described American imperialism, he said, quote, in appearance, it is very powerful, but in reality, it is nothing to be afraid of. It's a paper tiger, superficially powerful, but prone to overextension, leading to collapse. And that's the dragon. So they're in business. They've been around a long time. While the United States is playing, and North America playing these stupid chicken hawk games with a bunch of lunatics leading the charge. You can go back now, and you can see a parallel to just before World War I, when you had a bunch of moron politicians and military people that led the war into, quote, the Great War, one of the most stupid wars other than the other ones I just mentioned to you. That was totally avoidable. Hey, let's go around the world and look. Lovely times going over there in Thailand, aren't they? Millions of people out in the streets and they're not leaving for weeks. Oh, little riots in Bangladesh. Just killed a couple, 100-something. Oh, over Egypt. The military coup. Oh, let's be proper. Don't call it a military coup. Washington said it's not a military coup, even though the military took over. And, of course, it's a civil war. And there's a civil war in Libya, civil war in Syria. There's a civil war in Yemen, there's a civil war in Bahrain. It's ready to erupt in Saudi Arabia, pitchfork movement over in Italy. People taking to the streets continually, Portugal, Spain, Greece, same thing. You go around the world, south of the border, the Mexicans are very upset taking to the streets because the government's going to privatize their natural resource, the most beneficial thing they have, petroleum. And I love that word, privatization. That means selling expensive resources to your friends for bargain basement prices and getting a kickback. I'm not 6 years old. They do it everywhere. And then you go down to Brazil, Argentina. People are taking to the streets continually. You go around the world. Oh, look what's going on in Turkey. Wonderful time going on over there. The lira's at an all-time low against the dollar and other currencies. And there's a revolution pending there as well. It hasn't stopped since this summer, and things are getting worse. Oh, I forgot going over Ukraine. That's one of my favorite. People are taking to the streets because they want to join the European Union. Brilliant. You could become like Spain, maybe Greece. How about Italy? Oh yeah, 41% youth unemployment. Maybe you like Portugal a little better. Come on, what is this? It's a more stupidity. Again, looking for a political solution from an economic problem. And then you keep going around the world, Bulgaria, Romania. Oh, I forgot Africa, Central Africa, Sudan, Congo. Oh, Mali. Oh, the French. They can't get over that. They're back. They came back in at the end of last year, the beginning of last year, and they were going to fix the problems over there. And what did they call it before? I think it was French. What was it? French Sudan? Yeah, that was it. Yeah, they can't get over that colonial trip. So anyway, you're looking now around the world, and you have morons like Cameron and Obama, Bush before him, Sarkozy before Hollande. You have all of these very incapable people. And again, this is not rhetoric. Hey, how about Obamacare? You want to see a major failure? Look at that. How could anybody put up a program like that continually fails in the 21st century that looks like a high school science class put together? So it's failure at every level. Hey, how about fighting a war on drugs? Everything they do, they turn to failure, and we have sociopaths and psychopaths running the show. So we're looking a lot like, pre-World War I. Let's talk about the Duck Dynasty. Right. I didn't even know there was this thing. I looked up the number. 9 million people watch the show out of a country of 316 million people. They got this other thing going on with this other blowhard over here, next to us over here in New Jersey, this guy Christie, because they didn't like a mayor in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and they tied up the traffic lanes going over the George Washington Bridge into New York. Hey, yeah, but how about what's going on in Iraq? And the United States now sending more arms and ammunition to fight Al-Qaeda in Fallujah. Has anybody talked about bringing up Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and Colin Powell and Blair, Tony Blair, and all of the rest of the world leaders, the coalition of the willing, that started this illegal war? How about a nice Nuremberg trial to find out who knew what when? Because I wrote about this in the TrendsJournal. You could go to our website. I said it would be a failure before it began. Gannett News did a huge story on me, saying exactly what would happen before it happened, while they lied to us with Colin Powell telling the world that they had evidence and they were sure that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which he never had, and Donald Rumsfeld saying they knew where they were. So you can see where it's going. And again, these are the things that we should be talking about so that we could bring world peace and prosperity follows. And again, goes back to China. They're not interested in war. They're interested in money. They got 1.3 billion people, and they want to keep them happy because that's their biggest problem.
They're growing middle class. They're insisting on being treated decently.
Yes, and you're looking already at a unemployment rate among college grads at over 25% because they don't want crappy factory jobs. Well, that's why China is interested in growth. And that's why China's developing around the world. And that's why China's buying up properties, mines, ports, you name it. From Greece to Australia, from Africa to California and New York. Matter of fact, right up here, not far from me, in colonial Kingston, New York, in the foothills of the Catskill Mountains, which used to be called the Borscht Belt back in the old days, when the entertainers used to get go to Grossinger's and all these other places. The Chinese are now buying, they're starting off with 600 acres, and it's going to be up to 2,000 acres of this prime, beautiful Catskill land where they're going to be building, quote, China City.
Fascinating, Gerald. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
And don't forget, folks, to check out Gerald's TrendsJournal. He's from TrendsResearch.com, a fascinating website if you want to have an eye on the future. Scary, huh?
That's what it is.
After the break, John Rubino on This Week in Money.
Randy Elvis Frisky and his Las Vegas show band relive the movie music memories from Blue Hawaii to Viva Las Vegas, in Ladner, Chilliwack, Maple Ridge, Nanaimo, Victoria, Sydney, Courtenay, Campbell River, Surrey, Kelowna. Details at RandyElvisFrisky.com.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
My guest is John Rubino, author of several best-selling books on the economy and finances, and you have a brand new book to talk to us about, John.
Yeah, it's called The Money Bubble, co-authored with Gold Money's James Turk. And the premise is that all these other financial bubbles we've had for the last 30 years, junk bonds and tech stocks and housing, et cetera, have actually taken place within a bigger bubble, which is the money bubble. It's fiat currencies being inflated all around the world. And that bubble, at long last, is getting ready to burst. And when it bursts, it'll change everything. So this book is about the process that brought us here and how to prepare for the inevitable bust that leads to the discrediting of the whole concept of government-controlled currency.
Does that mean the Bitcoin really will become the world's next big currency?
Bitcoin is a fascinating subject, and if we have some time, it would be interesting to dig into it. Our take is that we'll go back to older, sounder forms of money like gold and silver as the basis of the global financial system. But these cryptocurrencies are actually an interesting add-on to that kind of a system because gold and silver are phenomenal as savings vehicles. In other words, you put some gold bullion in a safe place or some gold coins at home or whatever, and there's no counterparty risk there. That's an asset that you own that nobody can take away from you and doesn't depend on any other people keeping promises in order to retain its value. However, they're not so great for transacting. So a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or one of its successors would be a great global vehicle for transacting that would completely bypass these big fiat currencies out there. So Bitcoin is less a threat to gold and silver than to the dollar and the euro and the yen. And I think the process of it going mainstream is absolutely fascinating. You know, that might be one of the biggest stories of 2013 was the emergence of a legitimate functioning non-national currency.
Although you have countries like China who have banned it.
Well, that leads us to the question of what happens when it becomes a risk to the big fiat currencies out there, because the empires are going to strike back in some way. And so we'll find out if it's possible for them to either co-opt or crush a currency like Bitcoin. And Bitcoin's proponents say no, that this thing operates beyond the reach of national governments, and therefore it's going to survive and thrive. And I'm not technically sophisticated enough to have a good opinion about whether, you know, the NSA is able to hack the algorithm that determines the supply of Bitcoins going forward. I don't know anything about that, but I am watching with interest and hoping that Bitcoin is able to survive the onslaught. You know, because there's all kinds of regulatory and legal things that governments can do to a non-national currency that becomes a threat. You know, they can, like Germany just lately, defined it as a private form of money that you have to pay capital gains on. When you buy some Bitcoins and they go up and then you spend them on something else, that's a taxable event in Germany now. So we're going to see things like that, and we'll find out in the next year or two whether the concept can survive that kind of an onslaught. I think there's a good chance that it does, and I think that going forward we'll see not only the growth of Bitcoin in terms of the number of merchants that accept it, the number of people who figure out how to use it as currency, but other versions of it, you know, other competing forms of cryptocurrency, maybe some of them based on gold and silver. So I think this opens the door to a really fascinating free market money era, and I'm looking forward to it with interest.
Now, is this all still connected to the money bubble? But maybe right off to explain what you think a money bubble is and why we should be very concerned about it.
Money bubble is the extreme increase in the amount of fiat currencies in the world. In other words, we've been creating immense amounts of new dollars, euros, and yen over the past 30 years, and the process has accelerated lately. And because the price in the market, in other words, the exchange rate of those currencies, the stuff we can buy with it, hasn't changed appreciably, that is a form of extreme inflation when the supply goes through the roof but the price doesn't change. And that has to be brought back into balance somehow. In other words, the supply of these currencies has to go way down, or the value of these currencies has to fall off a table at some point, because there's just so much of it out there. There's such an oversupply of fiat currency in the world right now that inevitably we will come to a point when people figure out that the inflation of their national currency is policy and it's going to be policy going forward, and it's going to continue for as far as the eye can see. And they lose faith in their currency. They don't want to hold paper anymore because it's the policy of the U.S. government, for instance, with dollars, to make the dollar less valuable each year by creating so much more of it. And so they'll begin at an accelerating rate to convert their paper currency into real stuff. And that'll manifest as the prices of real things going up and the value of the currency going down. And the Austrian economics, in Austrian economics, they call that the crack-up boom. The point at which people figure out that their currency is going to fall in value for as far as the eye can see, and then just bail on it. And so we're headed for something like that, but not just with one national currency. We're headed for something like that with the whole concept of government-controlled currencies. You know, we're going to figure out at some point soon that putting a printing press in the hands of elected officials and their appointed bureaucrats is a really bad idea, because those guys are always inevitably going to abuse that privilege. And when that happens, the whole financial world changes, because all of a sudden these fiat currencies that rule the world right now will no longer function, and we'll have to figure out a way to get by without dollars and euros and yen as the basis of our financial wealth. And so, you know, we wrote this book as a way of explaining this process and then helping people figure out how to prepare for it, because it's not clear what is risk-free in a world where the currency that bonds and stocks and other forms of financial assets are based on are being actively destroyed by their governments. You know, it used to be that cash under the mattress was the safest thing, and an insured bank account was the next safest, and government bonds were very safe. Well, all of those things are no longer safe when the currency on which they're based is being destroyed. So the old ideas of money management, in which cash is your safest asset and bonds are your next safest, has to be thrown out the window and replaced by something that recognizes the reality of a global currency crisis. And so our thought is that we go back to sounder forms of money like gold and silver, and that becomes cash. You know, the silver coins buried in your backyard, or the gold coins in your bank safe deposit box, or hidden wherever else, or stored overseas. That becomes the layer of within your portfolio that is more or less risk-free, and then you work upwards from there. But you need to replace cash-based, you know, fiat currency cash-based assets with precious metals-based assets in order to actually have risk-free, safe capital.
It sounds like the Canadian government hasn't read your book. What they're doing right now, they had a sale of the last remaining Canadian $5 and $10 coins that were minted before World War I, and they said any they didn't sell, they were going to melt down for their cash value. Now, they're getting $1,750 for 10 grams of gold. I don't see how you make money by melting it down.
Yeah, I don't either. I'm not sure what their thought process is there. But most governments do have that attitude, that they would rather downplay the role of precious metals, because precious metals are direct competitors for their national currencies. When gold and silver go up, that's the same thing as saying the U.S. and Canadian dollars go down. And because fiat currencies depend on perception, they don't have any intrinsic value. So they only operate as a savings vehicle and as a transactional vehicle as long as we trust the ability and the willingness of governments to manage them prudently. And so when they go down in value, that shakes the confidence of the marketplace and threatens the existence of these currencies. So at all costs, governments have to prevent that from happening. And one way they do that is to suppress the price of gold, either through, like you said, with the Canadian government just being willing to sell the gold and silver coins without giving it much thought, or more actively in the futures market, or via dumping central bank gold secretly on the market. You know, there's lots of ways they do it, and it's all with the same goal, which is to prop up their fiat currencies at the expense of older, more stable forms of money.
Is this why China has been buying all the physical gold they can lay their hands on for the last few years?
Yeah, China has a different attitude about gold, and I think it's the correct one. They're accumulating an asset that, in their opinion, is undervalued. and that at a minimum it will go up in value versus the major fiat currencies of the world. And owning a lot of gold, which they're now accumulating, they probably got more gold than Germany, and they're rapidly closing in on the U.S. at the current rate of accumulation. This gives them the ability, if they want to back the yuan with gold and turn it into the only gold-backed reserve currency in the world, which gives China immense financial power in the world, and not just financial power, but also military power. The reason that the U.S. is able to run a global military empire with a quote-unquote defense budget that dwarfs the next 15 countries out there is because we have the world's reserve currency. Everybody wants dollars, so we can, in effect, borrow our defense budget and get away with it. And that allows us to bully everybody else in the world. And China and Russia and the other would-be superpowers hate that. And one way to turn that relationship on its head, for them to gain the ability to compete with us militarily, is to have a reserve currency that allows them to borrow their defense budget if they want to. And one way to do that is to back their currencies with gold, either explicitly by making the yuan and the ruble, et cetera, convertible to gold, or just by accumulating so much gold that it becomes a de facto gold standard. They've got so much of it that we trust their currency because they have cornered the market on the most stable financial asset out there.
We'll have more with John Rubino next on This Week in Money.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking to best-selling author John Rubino, his latest book, The Money Bubble, and it's so fascinating to take a look. Too much currency, not enough to back it up. You said countries perhaps need to look at the gold standard again. Germany tried to get back. They sold off 37 tons of gold. They tried to get it back, and they've been told it could take decades to get physical gold back in their vault.
Yeah, that story, it got a lot of play, but it didn't really have the impact you would think that it would. Because basically what happened was last year Germany asked for 300 tons of gold to be shipped from the U.S., where it was storing it, back to Germany. And 300 tons is not that much when you think of how much space it takes and how easy it would be to ship. The U.S. could have sent that gold back to Germany within weeks, and yet they told them, well, it's going to take 7 years. Now that implies that the gold's not there anymore, and that the guys at GATA and elsewhere who have been researching the activities of the Federal Reserve and the other central banks and concluding that they've been dumping their gold secretly on the market for years and years in order to depress the gold price, and therefore don't have much gold left anymore, are right. That there really isn't a lot of free gold out there to ship between central banks or between the major banks and the exchanges where people with futures contracts might want to take delivery of their metal. It's just not out there anymore. So we're heading for a time when this will be exposed. One way or another, it's going to come out if it's true, and it looks like it is true. And people will change their attitudes about gold because it will be perceived to be in shortage. Right now, you see the price action out there. You see the futures contracts in the gold market getting whacked all the time, and it looks like there's a glut of gold. But apparently that's not the case in the physical market. China is basically buying up all the gold that the world's gold mines are producing in a year, and then some, leaving no gold coming from mines for the rest of us who want to buy gold. And so that gap is being filled with shipments from central banks around the world who are using up their gold reserves in order to keep the market in line. And at some point, we figure this out. At some point it becomes public knowledge, either because some big Swiss bank tells its customers they can't have their gold back that they've been storing with the Swiss bank, or a metals exchange like COMEX defaults on a futures contract, and then the game is up. Everybody finally realizes that there's, rather than a glut of gold, a shortage of gold, and we start trying to buy it at any price. So when the panic buying starts, all the guys who are short gold out there, who have been building up big short positions in order to depress the market, will just get creamed. You'll have a short squeeze for the ages. It'll be something that will be headline news for a decade. And I think that's coming. It's probably something that can happen in the not too distant future, just because the imbalances are now so big. If China wants to do next year what they did this year, which is accumulate 1,500 to 2,000 tons of gold, then these shortages are going to become extreme. And all we need is one. All we need is one bank or one metals exchange to default, and everything changes.
Right now, the price of gold then is a real bargain, considering it was worth $700 more than it is right now just a year ago.
Well, yeah. I think that in terms of where it's going to be, which is probably $10,000 an ounce U.S., when you look at the amount of paper that's out there that needs to be balanced by an equivalent value of gold, that we're going to look back on this price and say, oh my God, I should have mortgaged my house and just, sold the car and just walked to work and put all that money in gold. Not that I'm recommending that your listeners do that, but I think there will come a time when a lot of people wish they had done that.
Gold mining stocks, a bargain right now?
That depends on how soon the turn in the gold price happens. Because if it stays low for another few years, then a lot of gold miners can't operate at this price, and they'll either close their mines and just go to care and maintenance and be dead money, or they will flat out go out of business. However, if gold stabilizes here and starts to rise, which I think is highly possible, if not probable, in 2014, then a lot of the miners who have just been crushed by the fear among investors that gold isn't going to turn around will go way up. You'll see them dramatically outperform gold just because they've been so beaten down in the last few years. And so you'll see a lot of junior miners become five-baggers with just a relatively minor move in gold, and you'll see a lot of the big miners double. So it really comes down to the timing of the comeback in gold's price. And I own some miners, and I'm looking at selectively buying some of the stronger ones over time right now. Although I'm not just jumping in with both feet, because I really don't know anything about the timing of gold's comeback. But once it gets going, we'll see the miners really, really pick up. So if you're going to buy miners right now, I would say buy the very strongest to give yourself some leeway in terms of timing. So the very strongest miners are the big names that most of us have heard of, and the royalty companies. Like I'll give you a few names of royalty companies as we go along here. I want to make sure I get them all right. But Royal Gold is one, and Franco-Nevada is another, and silver. Let me see. What's the silver one? You probably know that, Jim. What's the silver royalty company?
Gosh, I don't own any, so I don't know.
All right, well, let me find it here. Silver Wheaton. God, I can't believe it.
Of course, Silver Wheaton, yes.
Yeah, Silver Wheaton is the silver version of the other two. And basically what they do is they contract with miners to buy the output of those mines going forward, some portion of the output, and help the miners finance the completion of a given mine. And generally these deals are done at nice low prices, $5 an ounce for silver, several $100s an ounce for gold, and so it gives them a cushion in terms of the price of those metals to still be profitable. And it gives them some time, because they don't have big capital budgets or anything that have to be satisfied in the next couple of years, no matter what the price of what they're selling does, that it allows them to weather a few more years of artificially low metal prices and still be profitable and still make money for their investors. So I would go there first, and then gradually work into the more speculative names as the bull market gets going again.
Well, this financial situation gets so bad that the government, to help out the banks, will start dipping into our bank accounts, so-called bail-ins.
Yeah, that's another thing there should be a bigger story than it is. Basically what happened was last year Cyprus, some of their banks got into trouble. And instead of just using taxpayer money to bail out the banks, they took money out of bank accounts in order to finance their banks. And now the IMF and the European Union and others, including the Canadian government, have basically adopted plans to do the same thing if their banks get into trouble. So when the next financial crisis comes, not if, but when, because it is coming, a lot of banks are going to get into trouble and then react by looting the accounts of their customers. And knowing that, we should all be leery of bank accounts, especially if we're over the statutory limit for account insurance, because that money's not really our money anymore. We're leaving it at a bank, but in effect we've become, instead of a depositor, we've become an unsecured creditor of our bank. And so it should, in relative terms, make real assets like precious metals and equities in oil stocks, things like that, in oil companies, look a lot more interesting, because those are real assets that are more or less outside the banking system and not subject to bail-ins. So that hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't happen.
And didn't the U.S. government back in the 1930s during the Depression seize people's gold as well?
Yes, they did. And, it's conceivable that something like that happens again, although we were on a gold standard back then. So gold was money, and it was central to the financial system, and that's one of the reasons that they confiscated gold. And we're not in the same boat today. There are a lot of other things for governments to go after when they get desperate. And I would say bank accounts and IRAs and 401ks are just vastly bigger and more attractive right now as targets for a desperate government. So it's less likely that they're just going to say, well, you have to give us your gold and we'll give you, $1,000 an ounce for it or whatever. That conceivably could happen, and that's a reason for storing some precious metals offshore to avoid what happens in any given country. But it's less likely than it was back then, and so I would be more worried about my IRA and my 401k being looted. For instance, having the government come in and say, well, after the new health care law gave us the ability to force people to buy things, therefore we're going to insist that you cash out your stocks and buy government bonds in your IRA because it's for the good of the country. They now have constitutional authority to do that in the U.S., and I would say that's a bigger risk than the confiscation of gold, and certainly of silver. They're not going to. Silver is an industrial metal, so they wouldn't be able to logistically manage a silver confiscation. So that makes silver a little more interesting than gold, and much more interesting than a bank account, in my opinion, because it's the least threatened by all of these confiscations that are looming out there on the horizon.
Sounds almost like we'd be better off to dig a deep, dark hole somewhere somebody doesn't know about and throw all of our stuff in.
Well, see, we're coming into a crazy time when something like that is actually worth discussing. And, I hate that we have to talk about this because it didn't have to happen. We didn't have to build up all these debts and create the conditions in which a global financial crisis is almost certain, along with all the coercion and confiscations that come with things like that. But yeah, it's a lot better idea to hold real stuff now that is hard for a desperate government to get at, or hard for a desperate government to inflate away. So if you own some farmland, that's a pretty good thing. Your house, although it might be overvalued in today's market, at least is real. It has a use that no matter what its dollar value is, you still get. You can live in your house and it helps you on a day-to-day basis to live a better life. And there are lots of assets like that will allow you to sleep better at night than a bank account or an IRA full of bank stocks that might just collapse in the next financial crisis or be confiscated by the government. So, yeah, I know how crazy this sounds, and I hate it that it's now something that is actually feasible, actually possible.
Scary times.
Yes.
Maybe we should read your latest book, The Money Bubble.
You should. And there's more in the book besides what we talked about, because the fact that we've created the conditions for a global financial crisis doesn't tell us about the form of the the crisis. There are lots of different scenarios out there for this thing to play out, and all of them are painful, but they each has its own implications for the management of your money in your life. So we have a whole section of the book that covers these different scenarios, like the currency war scenario and the crack-up boom scenario, and the long wave collapse scenario, and what happens if interest rates go up to the variable rate part of the world. It goes on and on. There's even a concept called the debt jubilee, in which governments just write off all our debts. And what happens then? So I think the important point to understand is that crazy times are coming because we've borrowed way too much money, and that always leads to crazy times. But it's not really clear how they manifest, how they play out, because we've got a lot of different possibilities. We've got people in charge under pressure doing things that may or may not be rational at the time, and so there's no real way to know exactly how this goes. And so you should prepare for a variety of eventualities. And to do that, you diversify as aggressively as you can. You move some money overseas, and you buy a lot of different real assets here, and you try to be as self-sufficient as possible, and you look at your job and judge it in terms of what it will become if the world kind of spins out of control for a while, and you start taking steps to make yourself indispensable at work, or else develop some other skills. There's a lot of things you can do, and all of them are useful in diversifying you so that whatever happens, you've got something going on that still works.
John, maybe once again mention your website.
Sure. I run dollarcollapse.com, which is a site that's updated daily that covers a lot of what we talked about here.
Thanks a lot for chatting with us.
My pleasure, Jim. Thanks.
Thanks to our guests, Gerald Celente and John Rubino, and thank you for listening. I'm Jim Goddard for Phil Mackesy. We're back next week with more This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.